45,000 feet above the Mojave Desert, a B-52 bomber releases its grip, and for a moment nothing happens at all. Then the world tilts. A stubby, wedge-shaped machine with the nose sawed off begins to fall, not glide, fall, toward a dry lake bed in California. Inside it, a NASA test pilot named Bruce Peterson is flying something that was never supposed to fly like a normal airplane, because it was built, on purpose, without wings. It is May 10th, 1967. Nearly 4 minutes from now, this aircraft will hit the ground at over 200 miles an hour, roll 6 times, and come to rest upside down. And the reason it crashes will not be the missing wings. The missing wings were the whole point. The reason it crashes is something smaller, a control response so faint that Peterson can barely feel it fighting back. And NASA already knows about it. They just don't know it will matter today. The last 2 episodes already promised you this tumble. What neither of them told you is where the footage ends up, spliced a few years later into the opening titles of one of the biggest shows on American television, watched by millions who have no idea any of it is real. Peterson is 33 years old, and this is supposed to be the boring flight. His 16th glide test in the program. His 4th in this exact vehicle, tail number 803. One more unpowered drop from the B-52's wing, one more landing on the lake bed, and then the real work starts. Bolting in a rocket engine and finding out what this shape can actually do under power. Nobody is worried about today. Today is the formality before the interesting part. To understand why NASA built an aircraft with no wings at all, you have to understand what they were actually trying to solve. A spacecraft coming home from orbit has a problem. A normal airplane doesn't. It arrives moving at thousands of miles an hour, and it has nowhere to refuel and no room to spare for an engine. It only needs once for 90 seconds, at the very end. Wings help you fly. They also add weight, and weight is the one thing you cannot afford on the way down from space. So a handful of engineers asked a strange question. What if the body of the spacecraft did the work the wings were supposed to do? What if the shape itself, not a flat surface bolted to the side, but the actual rounded, flattened, blunt-nosed hull, could generate enough lift to glide home and land like an airplane, with no engine running at all? They called the concept a lifting body. No wings, just a fuselage doing an aircraft's job. The first version, the M2-F2, was built out of plywood in a Van Nuys hobby shop and towed into the air behind a modified Pontiac convertible. People called it the Flying Bathtub, and they were not being kind, but it flew. It proved the shape could work. And that success is the reason NASA spent the money to build a real one. The M2-F2, all metal, drop-launched from a B-52 at altitude, built to prove that a spacecraft could come home from orbit the same way this thing came home from 45,000 feet, unpowered and landing on its own. There is a cost to that shape, though, and it is not obvious until you are actually flying it. A normal airplane rolls because its wings are long, and the air pushing on one tip versus the other creates real leverage. The M2-F2 has almost no wingspan to speak of. When Peterson moves the control stick to roll the aircraft, the response is soft, sluggish, delayed, nothing like the sharp bite of a fighter jet. Test pilots had already flagged it. Weak roll authority, they called it, in the dry language of flight reports. It is exactly the kind of detail that sounds like an engineering footnote right up until the one day it decides everything. Back to the descent. Peterson is at altitude, established in the glide, tracking toward the marked runway painted onto the lakebed floor. And then, close to the ground, the aircraft begins to hunt, nose yawing one way, then rolling back the other, a rhythmic side-to-side motion pilots call a Dutch roll. It is exactly the failure mode that soft roll control invites. Peterson fights it with the stick, overcorrecting slightly because the aircraft simply will not answer him the way a normal plane would. And for a moment, it looks like he has it back under control. That is the moment a rescue helicopter, stationed nearby in case of exactly this kind of trouble, drifts into his peripheral vision. It looks close. It looks like it might be in his flight path. Peterson's attention, the one resource he cannot spare for even half a second this low to the ground, splits. And in that half second, the airplane drifts. It drifts off the black painted runway markings and out over a stretch of open lake bed with no markings at all. a flat, white, featureless salt pan that gives a pilot's eye nothing to judge height against. No runway lines, no horizon reference close enough to matter. Just glare and distance with no way to measure either one. Peterson is now trying to land an aircraft with almost no visual cue for how far above the ground he actually is. He fires the landing rockets, a burst of thrust meant to cushion exactly this kind of uncertain touchdown. It buys him a little lift, a little time. It does not buy him enough. The landing gear, 3 legs that need to swing down and lock before touchdown, is still in the process of extending when the ground arrives. NASA 803 hits the lake bed at more than 200 miles an hour with its gear not yet locked. The impact drives the unlocked gear back up into the airframe instead of absorbing the landing the way it was designed to. The vehicle slams down, bounces, and starts to tumble, not once but 6 full rotations across the salt flat, a research aircraft turning end over end like a dropped toy before it finally stops. Upside down, silent. For a moment, nothing moves at all. Then the rescue crews are running, and inside the wreckage, Bruce Peterson is alive. Barely. A fractured skull, a broken hand, his face torn open by the collapsing structure around him. He is pulled out, rushed to the base hospital, then transferred again, until he lands at UCLA Center, where surgeons begin what will become 18 months of reconstructive work on his face. And here is the detail almost nobody expects. The crash itself does not take his eye. The crash breaks his skull and his hand and very nearly kills him outright. But the eye survives the impact. It is a staph infection picked up during his hospital stay weeks after the accident that finally takes his sight in that eye for good. The thing that defines the rest of his life is not the 6 rolls across the lake bed. It's an infection he caught while healing from them. Peterson survives. NASA grounds the M2-F2 program for a hard look at what went wrong, and the answer that comes back is not wingless aircraft don't work. The lifting body concept was never the problem. The problem was specific and fixable. Not enough roll authority, a control response too soft to fight a Dutch roll before it became unrecoverable. Northrop rebuilds the airframe, adds a 3rd vertical fin, centered between the 2 tip fins Peterson's aircraft already had, and hands it back to NASA with a new name, M2-F3. It flies 27 more test flights over the next 2.5 years, gathering exactly the kind of data the program set out to collect in the first place. The shape was never the problem. It just needed one more fin. There is a strange afterlife to this crash that has nothing to do with aerospace engineering at all. NASA's own film crews had cameras rolling on the lake bed that day, and the footage, Peterson's actual accident, 6 real rolls, an actual research pilot nearly dying on camera, ends up, a few years later, cut into the opening titles of a television show about a test pilot rebuilt with bionic parts after a devastating crash. The $6 Million Man opens every single episode with the real crash of a real man, and most of the audience watching at home has no idea they are looking at genuine footage instead of a stunt. But the real payoff of May 10, 1967 isn't a TV opening credit. It's what happens 14 years later, when Space Shuttle Columbia drops out of orbit on a landing with no engine running and no powered approach. A blunt, wingless, in spirit shape, gliding home purely on the lift its own body generates. That's exactly the concept a plywood glider proved in a parking lot. And it's the concept a metal one very nearly died proving for real, on a dry lake bed nobody remembers the name of. Bruce Peterson never flew in space. But every space shuttle that ever came home did it, in part because he almost didn't come home from a routine glide test that was supposed to be the boring flight before the real one began.